Welcome to the 195th Aviation Symposium. I'm Don Hassey. This is Joel McDaniel. I was a crew chief in the 195th Assault Helicopter Company. Joe, or Little Mac as we call him, was a crew chief in a Thunder Chicken gun platoon on a gunship. And with that, I'll introduce Mac and let him start the presentation.
Thank you, Don. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate everybody coming out. Whenever SOAR contacted us about doing a symposium, first of all, I did not know what a symposium was. So I looked up in the dictionary, what is a symposium? And symposium is a conference or a meeting to discuss a particular subject. So that's what we're going to do here this morning. The 195th started out in World War II, believe it or not. It started out as a transportation company and was in Europe, Italy during World War II, and then it was dismantled, put on the shelf until the Vietnam era, and then they brought it back off the shelf. And of course, in World War II, there was no helicopters. So when they brought it off the shelf back in 1966, it came off the shelf as a aviation company, as the 195th Aviation Company, 195th Assault Helicopter Company. And we all started forming up at Fort Carson, Colorado, basically in January of 1967. We had Major Carlson, who was a captain at that time, was our company commander. And he, again, started forming us all up there at Fort Carson. And the 195th is comprised of two detachments. One detachment was the 609th Aircraft Maintenance Detachment. That was the detachment that whenever we needed maintenance on the choppers or they needed fixed, the 609th maintained our choppers and really kept us flying. They were really, really great mechanics, and a lot of our crew chiefs later on came out of the 609th. Okay. And the other company that was detached to us was the 366th Aircraft Avionics. As it says, avionics. They took care of our radios, and a lot of times our radios would get shot up or malfunctioned and so forth. They switched them out. They took care of our communication and so forth. So the 195th had two detachments, and those are our detachments. Like I said, in January of '67, it started forming up. It started off with Major Carlson, and there was like 5 officers. And these 5 officers were experienced. When I say experienced, they were on their 2nd and 3rd tour, because we all knew that it was headed to Vietnam. And so these 5 officers were the experienced guys that then started teaching all the rest of us the ropes. Because as we started forming up and people started coming in, like our pilots started coming in from like Fort Rucker, they were green, just out of flight school. And the different platoons, we had a first platoon, we had a second platoon, and we had a third platoon. The first airlift was the
Snoopy.
Their call sign was Snoopy's. The second was
Ghost Riders.
Ghost Riders.
Ghost Riders.
Yeah, and the third platoon was the gun platoon, the Thunder Chickens. And each one of the platoons did have an experienced officer, and then that experienced officer then trained the pilots that came in. Crew chiefs started coming in. They came in from Fort Rucker, Alabama. They came in from Fort Eustis, Virginia. And again, crew chiefs like Don and I, and some of the ones that we see out here in the audience, we did not know nothing. We were green. We didn't know anything. We had platoon sergeants that were experienced on their second and third tours, and they trained us and they taught us. Don, what platoon were you in?
Ghost Riders.
Ghost Riders.
Ghost Riders platoon.
Now, there's a couple of terminologies let's talk about a second. Crew chiefs, obviously, the crew chief, that was his helicopter. He signed for it. Would you believe the Army made you sign for the helicopter? And here's like 18, 19-year-old kids who their parents wouldn't let them borrow their car, but the Army gives you this $250,000 flying machine, but they made you sign for it. On our pay, could we pay back $250,000? Hell no. But anyway, somebody had to be responsible for it. So the crew chief, that was his aircraft. We had the gunners, because on a Huey, you had a pilot, you got a co-pilot, you got a gunner, and you got a crew chief. In flight, the crew chief is the gunner on the left side. The gunners started arriving, and they came in from mainly, I think, Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Yeah, a lot of the gunners were infantry MOS, and a few of them had combat tours in Vietnam. Most of them were right out of AIT, and they joined the company. We all formed up at Fort Carson. When Mac and I got there in January from Fort Eustis, there were two people in the company, a supply sergeant and his PFC helper. We didn't have any officers, and there were 12 of us that arrived at that time. And every day, new people would come into the company. And then after a period of time, enough people showed up, then material started showing up. And for a month or two, we had to unload all the trucks by hand because we didn't have our forklift yet. And it took them a while to get the forklift there. And then once we got that, we could lift up. And I remember lifting, 2,000-pound boxes off a deuce and a half with manpower. It can be done, especially when you're 18, 19 years old,
There was an aerial view here of Fort Carson, Colorado, where we started forming up at.
I guess there's a real funny story. Major Carlson, who was our commanding officer, had worked with Special Forces in the early 60s, 61, 62, and he was with the 55th Transportation Company, and they had the Shawnee helicopters. Many people call them, in Vietnam, we call them the flying banana, because that's what they look like, with two rotor blades and like a banana. And he, as the transportation officer in their transportation department, packaged that whole company up, and they shipped to Vietnam. And he was one of the first helicopter companies to arrive in Vietnam in 62 or 63. And he did a year tour there. Eventually, his company was changed to a combat assault company, and they were given Hueys. But when he came back, he was the captain at the time, and the Department of Army sent him from Fort Walters to Fort Carson, Colorado. He reported in to General Williams, and General Williams said, "You're a transportation army. There is no transportation army going to lead a unit under my command into combat. So you just go back where you came from." So he walked out the general door and went back to Fort Walters and told him what he said. And he said, you go back and tell General Williams it's not his decision. This is a Department of Army decision. You get back out there and form that company. And so he went back, and when he got there, evidently a phone call had reached General Williams, and he accepted him, but he wasn't happy about it. And Major Carlson, he was promoted to major right after that, said, well, I'll tell you what, you give me 60 days, and if you're not happy with what I'm doing and how the training is going, then I'll resign. And he said, okay. And Major Carlson was a smart enough Army politician that he knew he needed to become best friends with the general's executive officer. So he befriended the colonel and took him everywhere we did, everywhere we trained, and we trained. And we got all the new pilots in, all the TO&E equipment, and at the end, before we shipped out, Lieutenant Colonel Weimer, the commander's evaluation, said, I have never seen a company better organized or more ready for combat than the 195th Aviation Company. I recommend Major Carlson remain in command. So he won over, the general staff, and off we went to Vietnam.
Yeah. This is Butts Field there in Fort Carson where we started training, and I think there's two terminologies here that we're going to talk about in a second. Whenever you hear Don or I say, because there's people in the audience that don't know the difference, a slicks versus a gunship. A slick basically is what you see here without the armament. They had a door gunner on each side, but they did not have the rockets, the miniguns, or this kind of armament. And basically the slick carried the troops in, and they extracted them also. And they were the workhorse. They carried supplies, they carried ammo, in resupplying places. They were the medevac ships and so forth. The gunships were the ones that protected the slicks. We flew cover for the slicks, and later on, as we explained, when the teams were in on the ground and so forth, and they engaged with the bad guys, then we protected them and so forth. So that's the difference that you'll hear. And then, of course, LZ, you'll hear Don talk about the LZ. LZ was a landing zone. That's where the choppers went in on the ground and so forth. So that's a little terminology that you'll probably hear, so we want to clarify it. Should we move on?
So through the summer and spring, we conducted 4 flight training exercises, and it culminated with the gun platoons firing live rounds, rockets, and miniguns, because they never got to do that at flight school at Fort Walters. This was the first time they ever actually got in an armed helicopter and fired live ammunition. And the first field training exercise involved a British infantry company that was visiting Fort Carson, and we provided helicopter support for them. The second field training exercise was platoon flying, unit movement, resupply, heliport security, convoy control, 24-hour security were also stressed. The third field training exercise, we supported 2 infantry companies. We moved the heliport, our base, as aggressors were used to probe the company defenses. The fourth training exercise, we supported an infantry battalion day and night, conducted nice displacement to a new heliport, and gunnery training, live fire day and night. And then flight training, each aviator received day and night check rides with the company instructor pilot to make sure they were proficient in the company's procedures and standards.
One other item on this flight training is that being located at Fort Carson, Colorado, which is by Colorado Springs, the pilots, to get their night training and so forth, flew down to Albuquerque, New Mexico. So we'd fly down there at night, and I think we kind of followed Interstate 25. Mr. Yoder, is that right? Yeah. So we followed Interstate 25 down to Albuquerque at night, which was extremely dark. It was pitch dark because there was nothing out there. And so we go down there and basically sit down, refuel, and then the pilots would fly back. That's how they got their night training and so forth. We had extensive training, and we had very good training, and which paid off later on. Our experienced pilots taught our inexperienced pilots. They taught them maneuvers for insertion and extraction, and I think they also for company formation flying and assault flying and so forth. Company movement. Yeah. So once our training is done, now we're up to like August of '67, and we get our orders. We're going to be deployed, and there was no guess of where we're going. Everybody knew we was going to Vietnam, but can you believe a week before we deployed, they gave us an hour-and-a-half block of instruction on how to survive in cold climates. We're going to a tropical climate, right? And they give us instructions on how to survive in the Antarctic. That was interesting. So anyway, in August of '67, we left Fort Carson bound for Vietnam. There was an advance party of 35 men that flew the aircraft from Fort Carson to Stockton, California. Via this route here, we could not go over the top of the Rocky Mountains at that time of year.
I can add some color on that. Major Carlson picked our route flying from Fort Carson south to Albuquerque, south to El Paso, Texas, and then across to Phoenix, Arizona, Las Vegas, and then and Colonel Weimer, when he heard the route, said, "No, you're not flying that. You can't keep track of the crews, and I can't keep track of you. You're not going. You go direct." And he said, "Well, sir, if you want us to go direct, then we're going to need fuel along the way. So you're going to have to arrange mobile fueling points, a couple of them in the Rockies and a couple of them in the desert as we go." And then he pointed out on the map where they needed to be. And the colonel said, "Okay, I see your point. You go the way you want to."
It was an interesting trip because I was in the advance party, and along with a few other guys in here. And it was an interesting trip. You know, we, like Don said, went down to Albuquerque, refueled, went down to El Paso, stayed overnight. Some of the guys went over to Juarez. That's another story. Then from there we flew low level, basically all the way to Phoenix, and this is in August. You know, and it's hot going across the desert in a chopper, and then we refueled in Phoenix, and then up to Las Vegas, and we spent the night in Las Vegas. And from Las Vegas was Fresno, California to refuel, and from Fresno on into Stockton, California. While the advance party was doing that, the rest of the company was was packing up and putting stuff in connexes and getting ready to put it on a ship to be shipped out to Vietnam.
One thing, because Major Carlson had been to Vietnam before, he filled up all kinds of Connex containers with ice machines, refrigerators, and window air conditioning units. And when we got to Vietnam, we could get anything we wanted from any company in Vietnam because we had valuable trading stock.
Called the barter system, and it really paid off. So anyway, so everything gets put into connexes, and then it was shipped by rail flat cars out to Oakland, California, and then it was put on a troop ship to be sent to Vietnam. Now the men, the rest of the company, October 10th.
Yeah, we went back we went on leave, we went back, we loaded everything onto flat cars, and then we loaded into a airplane, or a commercial airline, flew to San Francisco, bus to Oakland, and got on the General Walker, which is a troop ship, carried 2,000 troops, and we were one of the last groups to go to Vietnam on this ship. It was retired right after our voyage, but it was in World War II, Korea, and then served in Vietnam. It took us 30 days to get there.
I've heard some stories. I wasn't on that ship. I flew over with the advanced party. We flew in a commercial airline. But the stories I heard about the troop ship, these these guys are on there, they were sick, seasick, and so on and so forth. So I was glad I flew over rather than go over 30 days on a troop ship.
So we went underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. This is an actual picture off the Nelson Walker that one of our members took at sundown. We got out into the ocean, and it was about 9-10 o'clock. We all went to bed, and in the belly of the troop ship, we were in cots that were like 3 to 6 high, depending on where we were at. And the boat started rolling in the open ocean. And people started getting seasick. And that lasted for about 2 weeks. And then when we reached Vietnam, this is a picture from the bow, and we're approaching Cam Ranh Bay, and these are some of the troops. We had another helicopter company, several infantry companies, and this is approaching Cam Ranh Bay. This is a picture of the Nelson Walker. We're anchored in the bay at Vung Tau. The landing ship transport pulls up the side, and we did a amphibious assault onto the Vung Tau beach, which was secure because Vung Tau was an R&R center for the VC and for us. So both sides used it. And so we get off of the landing craft, like it's D-Day, and we're fresh in this war zone. There's all these people on the beach, girls in swimming suits and guys in swimming suits and deer. And, well, this ain't gonna be bad. So we got on a bus, and then they took us to the airport, and then we flew on a C-130 to Benoit and then to Long Binh.
While they were having fun on the troop ship, the advanced party was having another area of fun. We flew over to prepare the company area for everybody else that was coming. What was our company strength? About 250 men?
Total?
Yeah.
Yeah.
About 250 guys. Our company area, we were at Long Binh, which was north of Saigon, and it was a large base there. Our company area, if you can imagine, like a 2.5 acre bare dirt field. Okay, that was our company area, and it was up on the northeast perimeter of Long Binh. When we got there, again, it was just a bare 2.5 acre piece. So we proceeded to put together the tents that we were going to be sleeping in, mess hall areas, and getting it all prepared for the company to arrive. I think we've got oh, here we go. This is basically the company area before anything was built there and so forth. This picture here, I want to point out, this gentleman here was, we called him Chief, AKA his name was Christie, but we call him Chief. There's yours truly. There's Frank Sangelo, who is with us here today. And this is Don Hoskins right here. I do want to recognize that Don's wife is here. His daughter, his son, and his grandson are with us today. So we appreciate you guys being here today. Don was with us there, and then he did get wounded, and he shipped out, and then later came back and did, I think, 2 more tours. He did 4 tours altogether. So this was the area that we built up for the rest of the company to have a place to be when they arrived there.
I might add, his second tours were with the 281st Assault Helicopter Company,
Yeah.
supporting Project Delta.
Yeah, correct, right. Once the company area was complete, then the company had arrived, and they had a nice, cozy place to be.
Yeah, the Sea Train Washington was the ship that we transported the helicopters over on. And the helicopters all had to be cocooned and mothballed, protected from the salt air, because they're basically out on the deck. And when they got there, then the maintenance crews led by Joe Conway, who was our maintenance officer, went out, demothballed them, and then the aviators brought the helicopters to Plantation, our new airfield. And Plantation Army Airfield had just been built when we got there. In fact, they were still doing some work, some grading work on the other side of it. And so it was built and as a home to us, and it grew from there. And the last aircraft got there November 27th, and we flew what's first mission November 30th. That was a direct combat assault mission. We weren't really ready to start missions, but the Army needed us. They had a big, huge combat assault they were doing, and they needed the helicopters. So we were able to fly it. And Major Carlson has told us that, you know, he took a brand new assault helicopter company, and they're going in, and it was a combat assault with full suppression, and, you know, he's leading, and he looked back and he said, all of the crew members were doing their job, the door gunners were firing, you know, they were just performing magnificently, just like he trained us at Fort Carson. And then after that, the air crews farmed out, and half of them went to our sister company, the 191st Boomerang. The other half went to the 240th Greyhounds, and after 5 days, the crews switched, and this gave the 195th crews benefit of training with 2 different experienced companies. And then November 15th, all the pilots, crew chief, and gunners returned to Long Bend and started preparation to become operational. December 1st, the 195th became operational, and our first supported mission was to support the Special Operations Group. Now, those of you in the Special Operations Group know that it was shortly after that. That sounded like, you know, needed a little better name, so they changed it to the Studies and Observation Group. And it sounded like it was a bunch of professors studying the war, and not a bunch of Green Berets going into enemy territory. And so we conducted operations. Our unit mission was support units, was area recon, determine direction of enemy movement, determine combat potential of enemy units, capture prisoner, direct and monitor artillery, and bomb damage assessment. Our mission was aerial recon of the LZ before, insert and instruct the recon teams, provide gunship cover on insertions and extractions, radio relay, flare ship, medevac. And January 31st, the Tet Offensive began. January 29th, we were inserting a team out by Bearcat, or we were picking up a team, and it was a hot LZ. And the LZ had been burned off, and when it came down to land, dust came up, and the pilots lost visual contact with the ground, and they crashed. And Wendell Skinner was pinned underneath the aircraft, and they thought he was dead. So they all got out of there. Well, Major Carlson was in Song Bay, and he got back about 11 o'clock at night, and CQ, the orderly room officer, came and said, "We lost an aircraft." And I said, "Well, we get everybody out." And he said, "No, one of our crew chiefs was pinned under the aircraft and killed." And he said, "Well, you didn't get the body. We don't leave our people behind. That's not how we do it." So he got up in the middle of the night, grabbed a co-pilot, a crew chief, and a gunner, and he flew out there by himself with no gun control or support, found the LZ, landed, told the co-pilot to take off and go hover out of the area so he wouldn't attract attention to the enemy, to the aircraft on the ground. And he and the crew chief went over, found out that Wendell was alive, lifted him up, got him out, and took him and medevaced him. And a few years ago, he came on our website where we communicate, and he wanted to know if we had any contact with the crew chief that had lost their legs right before Tet. And guy said, "Well, that would be me. I didn't lose my leg." And that was the first time they had met and got together since it happened, because Major Carlson didn't have time to go to the hospital and see him, because 2 days later Tet started, and he was, we were all busy.
That brings us up to Tet of 68, which that was a major offensive at that time, probably one of the biggest offensive. The bad guys wanted to take over Saigon. They wanted to take a big push to win the war and so forth. But and a lot of what they were expecting was that they would go into Saigon. They would go into these major areas, and the populace would rise up and help them. Well, it didn't happen. So that didn't happen that way. So with Tet, the morning of Tet, our perimeter was attacked, and so the people there, our guys, defended the perimeter, and then the gunships got up and defended the perimeter and repelled the attack. And at that time, there was a simultaneous attack on Saigon, on the west side of Saigon. They were coming in from the west side through the Chalum Chinese area, over that river there and so forth. And so for 3 days and 3 nights, we flew gun runs and to defend Saigon, and was I think as a citation that we received as a company stated that we were quite instrumental in repelling the attack on Saigon there. Here's a thing regarding the the Tet Offensive thing, where our unit single-handedly, in an outstanding manner, their efforts during the engagement were one of major contributing factors defending the enemy. The men in the company there defended our perimeter, and so therefore our company area was not overran. Okay. Then on April 16th, we were terminated on flying some of the missions.
Yeah, this was, you can go in, the 240th, our sister company, was flying a lot of long hours down in the Delta. And the SOG mission, we had stripped standby after we inserted a team, so our hours weren't as high. And they wanted to fly those missions and not have as many hours on their aircraft. And so we found this out later, Mac talking to Captain Wilkie, who was one of our pilots, and he was transferred to battalion, and he related this story. And when they, so they went, May 2nd, we had a maintenance down day, and May 2nd is the day that Frenchy Massow and Leroy Wright were killed, and a guy, medic named Roy Benavides, went in and saved the survivors and received the Medal of Honor that day. And there were, after that, there were some, there were some issues that Colonel Drake, Commander of Cigna, didn't like, and they go, these SOG guys are crazy. We want to go back down in the Delta where it's safe. And so they requested to not fly those missions anymore. And when we got flying at Dao Tiang Way, Colonel Drake said, I told them I wanted my 195th back. And part of it was because we were green as a gourd, trained by Major Carlson. We didn't have any bad habits, and one little small detail, the 240th, when they flew at treetop level, approaching an LZ, they were 100 to 200 feet off the trees. When we flew treetop level, we went between the trees, and sometimes we picked up a few limbs on the skids and, chin bubble. And so May 15th, we returned to the special missions. As the 240th requested, they wanted to go back to combat assaults. And this is a picture of the use of rope ladders, and if you'll notice, that's real rope with the, it's not the modern ones that we ended up using later, and these were a real bear to climb. And but this is a team we're picking up with the rope ladders. And then Major Hummel and Colonel Drake decided, since we were flying into Cambodia, that we should get paint jobs like the 20th SOS, Green Hornets. And so Major Hummel traded, we had 31 aircraft, so he went to Benoit, the Air Force, and he said, hey, I got an AK-47 and I'll trade it to you for a Camel paint job. They said, okay, so 31 AK-47s later, we had all our aircraft painted Camel. And at that time, they were sterile. They didn't have the United States Army on them. We were signed a non-disclosure agreement, basically. If we went into Cambodia, we were working for some private company, and they weren't coming. The government wasn't coming to get us, and we couldn't carry any dog tags or ID or anything on the aircraft after that. And this is...
At that time, we were supporting CCS.
Well, CCS hadn't been formed at that time, so we were supporting Sigma and Omega. And then in December of '67, You were up at Dacto supporting, what was that unit you were supporting? But it was CCC basically. And so then this is the flight crews training with the McGuire rigs, and these are, so the pilots that hadn't lifted, you know, people out of the trees could get some practice with them because it's a little tricky. And so this is a crew chief and a couple gunners that are riding the McGuire rigs at the time, practice and giving the pilots practice.
Let me make a note here on the Camel. The 195th was the only helicopter company in the Army in Vietnam that was Camel. The only other one was an Air Force unit, like Don mentioned, was the 20th. But the 195th was the only Camel company. So we thought we were cool.
Officially authorized.
Officially authorized. Thank you, Larry.
And the reason we were officially authorized was because of SOG, and SOG reported directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and so nobody in Vietnam could tell us what to do. And so this is a picture of the ladder ship, and you can notice we've got cables. The ladders are wider now, and they've got 3 cables instead of the 2 ropes, and it was a lot easier for the troops to climb and snap into when they were being extracted.
We've got some gentlemen in the audience out here that use these, probably both of them, the McGuire rigs and the strings.
This is unhooking from the McGuire rig. The aircraft would have to come in and hover, lower the troops to the ground, and then somebody would have to come out and grab the rope, take it away, and let the person off, and then keep the rope taut so the aircraft could set down and keep it out of the rotor blades, because if the rope gets in the rotor blades, it's going to be a bad day for everybody. So then in July, we had a mission. We had a SOG recon team in trouble, and we had a 30-man hatchet force in trouble, and they were both in what is known now as a prairie fire emergency. They were in direct threat of being overrun within minutes. And so we were tasked, the 195th was tasked to go extract them. Well, it just so happened that that morning, a typhoon was blowing in from the South China Sea. And so we got in, we got everybody out, and we resulted in one of our pilots, Mr. Sigmund, or Jim Sigmund, receiving the Silver Star, and 8 of the pilots received Distinguished Flying Crosses. This is a photograph of the award ceremony where they're getting that award, and Colonel Drake is right down here, that's Colonel Drake. And for those in the room that know him or knew him, he was about 250, 260 pounds, and built like a wrestler. I mean, he was a big man. And then in September, we supported Project Delta, and we spent the whole month with them. Delta calls it Operation 568 Alamo, and we had 5 slicks and 2 gunships, and we spent the whole month of September supporting them. And this was the only mission in the Vietnam War that the 281st Assault Helicopter Company did not support Project Delta. For some reason, there was a technicality. They couldn't come into 3 Corps, and so they assigned the 195th. And because Delta didn't have control of it, they didn't get a full complement of aircraft and gun teams. And so this is a plaque that Lieutenant Neal received. He was the flight commander for the whole month, and at the end of the mission, we flew up to Nha Trang with Major May, and they presented Gene with this plaque for outstanding service. And there's some word that, they weren't happy with our service. Well, it wasn't us. They were happy with what we did. They were just unhappy there wasn't enough of us. And so during that mission, one of the recon teams that discovered a arms cache, and they had their hatchet force was the 81st Airborne Company. We inserted them. We brought a bunch more helicopters up, get a TIM ship inserted them. They overran and captured the ammo dump, and at that time it was the largest ammo cache discovered in the Vietnam War. It included 547,000 AK-47 rounds and required 14 Chinook sorties to remove all of it. And in the after-action report, Major May noted that, we needed more aircraft because they couldn't run a full complement of teams. They went back to Nha Trang, and then a month later they came down with the 281st, and they ran some more missions down there. And on September 13th, Major Russell Bronson took over command of the 195th, and coming in 1969, we continued supporting Special Forces in Song Bay. This is one of our crew chiefs sporting an RPD machine gun. Since we were friends with the SOG guys, we traded weapons and things, and so a lot of times we could have extracurricular weapons for our personal weapons on the ship. And in February 17th, Major Ronald Vines assumed command. In the first 4 months of 1969, the 609 TC detachment and the 366 Signal detachment were put to the test repairing aircraft. We had, during that period, was the famous COSVN raid where Jerry Mad Dog Shriver was killed in action, and they're still looking for him today. And so this is just pictures of the maintenance crew patching up shot up helicopters. And
at that time, it was estimated that 85% of the LZs we went into were hot, went in or came out of, were hot LZs. 85%. Compared to a little early on, there would be LZs, and it may have been 40% or 50% or something like that the LZs were hot. But starting around February, March of '69, all the LZs, they had spotters at these LZs and so forth. And so when the teams hit the ground, they were either compromised or we had to pull them right back out. So 85% of our LZs were hot. That's what resulted in a lot of aircraft being shot up, a lot of aircraft being damaged. And here, earlier, I had mentioned about the 609th, our maintenance detachment. They were super. They kept us flying. Those guys worked 3 shifts over there, keeping us flying day and night, day and night, day and night. And so they really saved us a lot at that point in time.
so I jump to the next slide.
Yeah.
The center picture with the lower guy, that's Alex Saunders riding a string, and you notice there's 2 people and only 1 rope? That made for a very exciting flight back. You have to corner Alex sometime and ask him to tell you the story.
Alex is sitting right back there.
But yeah, this is just pictures of extracting troops and, you know, what it was like on the strings. And August 9th, Quan Loy was put under red alert, and about 2,200 hours, rockets came in, and the 4 195th crew members volunteered to help defend the perimeter. The battle lasted all night. There were 102 enemy dead in the wire the next morning. And 2 months later, those crew members received silver stars for their actions that night. And August 17th, Major Gary Williams assumed command. And throughout 1969, Sky Chief crewmen received 1 Distinguished Flying Cross, 15 Silver Stars, 102 RCOMs, 42 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 298 Air Medals for their service in the Republic of Vietnam. And all the missions were classified with no further changes. And on June 7th, 1970, the 195th Sea Operations supporting Special Forces recon teams and hatchet forces. And this is our campaign partition flyers that we received. The first two were, of course, World War II, and then the rest of them are Vietnam.